Welcome, everybody. My name is Christine Curry, and I am the Iowa Outreach Coordinator of the Izaak Walton League's Upper Mississippi River Initiative, known as UMRI. Welcome to our June 2023 series on soil and water conservation, Thinking Like a Watershed program. This is our last one of the year. And we usually end them in June because everybody is out for the summer in the fields, etc. The monthly presentations are jointly hosted with our Izaak Walton League colleagues of the Upper Mississippi River Initiative. And our consistent co-host includes Panora Conservation Chapter member Chris Henning. So thanks so much, Chris, for all your efforts and being here with us every month. And the Des Moines chapter is not zooming in with us. They do periodically from time to time, but they've got another program at the Des Moines chapter house, so we won't be seeing them this evening. But I appreciate you all coming on board with us. We're happy to have you join us for the Climate Land Leaders in Name and Deed with Sarah Hunt, Program Director and Land Leaders, and Ruth Rabinowitz. I hope I didn't mess that up too much, Ruth.
Good, Rabinowitz.
Rabinowitz. Okay, great. I am going to let my colleague, Caroline Van Schenk, talk a little bit about our program this evening. And this is Caroline's last time, and I just want to share with you, she's been fantastic. She's helped coordinate these events for the past 3 years with us, and she's been an amazing partner and colleague, and I'm going to miss her greatly. I'm already filling the void. So thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us this evening. And you did a lot of the prep work for this presentation, so I'm going to let you read your great words that you wrote up about this presentation.
All right. Hi, Christine. Thank you. I am gone but not forgotten with you. You're not done with me yet. Okay. So when we approached Sarah and Ruth about speaking and explaining what the Climate Land Leaders are all about, this is what actually Sarah and I wrote together to describe what this evening is about. Agriculture is a climate problem and a climate solution. With compassion, creativity, and collaboration, Climate Land Leaders are working towards solutions. So states the homepage of the Midwest-based Climate Land Leaders, begun with 15 landowners and farmers, and now it's home to more than 80. Members work together to change their land practices to increase carbon sequestration and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They engage in policy advocacy that shifts public investment to ecosystem services, habitat, soil health, and agriculture as a solution, not just the problem, define their work using the one tool they alone can wield, the farm and forest land they steward. Then, this is where I wrote, I'm glad Sarah was okay with it, things get different. Climate Land Leaders explicitly want to affect 75,000 acres of Midwestern farm and forest land by December of 2024. Members express their actions as a response to a rapidly changing climate. They think expansively about how to use their resources to address inequities and the next generation of farmers and land stewards. And they are clear, they are in this together. What is it about Climate Land Leaders that works for its members, and what is uppermost on their minds this year? So let me just quickly introduce Sarah, and then Christine will introduce Ruth, and then we'll give the floor over to both of them. Sarah Hunt is one of our two speakers today. She's the program manager for the organization Climate Land Leaders. I asked her for a short bio because what's on their website is a little vague, as I said. It's clear that she comes from a background of music, of farming, of nonprofit work. But the thing that I like most about what she said is that she wears many hats for Climate Land Leaders, which is a startup organization. But mostly she helps members, this is what she said, transform their land in service of community and planetary health. Just love that, Sarah. All right. Christine, do you want to introduce Ruth and then we'll let them take it over?
Sure, absolutely. I love that, those last few words that
Mhm.
pulled together. I think that's beautifully said. Thank you. And Ruth, I actually had the privilege of listening to one of her first, maybe one of her first presentations about 2 or 3 years ago on the Iowa Farmers Union. You were a guest on their Lunch and Learn. And
So did I.
I wrote down her name and I'm like, wow, what a cool lady. Here she is from California. She inherited some farms in Iowa and she's coming back here and she's going to live here half the year in Madison County. And she's doing all this amazing conservation work. She's transforming all of this land that she inherited to conservation. And I'm just like so inspired, because
I can't hardly hear them.
I know how it is. So to come back to Iowa from California, I lived in California for many years, but anyway, so Ruth is going to share a few things with us this evening about why she's involved with many different organizations and groups. And so she's going to share with us her involvement with the climate land leaders. Thank you so much, both Ruth and Sarah, for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us. And thanks to everyone for being here. I know we're in these long lingering days leading up to summer solstice. And depending on where you are, it might be really hard to be inside right now. So appreciate you all being here and appreciate everyone who watches the recording after the fact. We're really honored to be part of this series. And you've all had a really great set of discussions leading up to this point. So many thanks to Caroline and Christine and Chris for organizing and inviting us. Let's see, I am going to. Is that looking good for everyone?
Looks great, Sarah.
Awesome. All right. Well, there we go. I'm Sarah Hunt. I'm coming to you from St. Paul, Minnesota this evening. And as Christine mentioned, I'm on staff at Climate Land Leaders, where I get to learn from landowners and farmers like Ruth, who are working to increase soil and water health, increase biodiversity, and reduce planet warming greenhouse gas emissions through an incredibly powerful partner, the land that they steward. So I'm going to share a bit about why Climate Land Leaders formed. We're just about 3 years old, what we're focused on, and how these landowners and farmers are making progress. And then Ruth is going to give you the meat of it, an on-the-ground perspective, and share some of her journey of stewarding and transforming inherited cropland. All right, so I'm going to start first with the problem. You may have seen this chart before. It's a couple of years old. It's from Project Drawdown. And this is showing global emissions by sector. You can see that green sector on the left is agriculture, food and land use. And that accounts for nearly a quarter of planet warming greenhouse gas emissions globally. Also worth noting that 25%, it's actually higher than that if we were to include fossil fuel-based fertilizer used to grow crops, which in this data, as it's presented here, is included in that blue industrial category. All right, so I'm gonna bring us to a more systemic view of emissions, and this is in the US. So when we look at our overall US food system, and that includes production of fertilizers, direct emissions from farming, conversion of land to cropping, the processing, distribution, preparation of food, and waste, this whole system produces over a third of US greenhouse gas emissions. Here in Minnesota, where I am, our state combines agriculture, forestry, and land use into a sector, and it's Minnesota's second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. But if you take out that beneficial offsetting effect of forests storing carbon. Agriculture is in fact Minnesota's #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions today, particularly as other sectors have come down, like the energy sector. And we're not heading in the right direction. Again, here in Minnesota, nitrous oxide emissions, that's from crop agriculture, and methane emissions from animal agriculture, both increased over the last decade and a half, according to our pollution control agency. And I know that emissions from Iowa have also increased in that same timeline, in that same time frame. I believe Iowa ranks #2 in our country for emissions from agriculture. So agriculture is a climate problem, but it also holds great potential as a climate solution. And we in the Midwest, where Climate Land Leaders is focused, have an incredible opportunity to lead, and indeed, we would argue, have to lead in climate-friendly agriculture to truly make progress on mitigating climate change. And this is what united the founding group of Climate Land Leaders about 3 years ago. They were recognizing the power that they held as landowners and farmers to work through their land and in their farming operations to alleviate climate change. And they were seeking a group of like-minded peers to learn from and with as they made changes on the ground. We started from 13 members just as the global pandemic was getting underway back in March 2020. We've grown to over 80 landowners and farmers today, little over 29,000 acres. And I'll give you a sense of where we are. So where these landowners and farmers are working. Climate Land Leaders live all over the country. And I know this group reflects folks from all over the country, not just the Midwest, but they own farm and forest land in the Midwest. They own or control acreage ranging from 5 owned acres and 100 rented to 20 owned acres to over 2,000 acres, combination of rented and owned. And these farms are a mix of row crops like corn and soybeans, conventional, organic, transitioning to organic. We've got farmers with pasture-based livestock operations. We've got folks who are restoring natural areas on their lands. Climate Land Leaders doesn't have a gender niche, although we are around 2/3 women and the organization is women-led. Also worth noting, over half of the cohort are non-operating landowners. So we've got a lot of folks who are often working with tenants, farming tenants, to implement these changes on their land. And you can see we've got a big goal. Within these 2 years, by the end of next year, 2024, that will have grown to over 200 people who are making stewardship decisions about 75,000 acres of farm and forest land. So I want to give you a sense of who Climate Land Leaders are. They're at all different points in their conservation journey. I think that's a really important benefit of this group, that diversity of where folks are at, but they share these things in common. So they own or control, they make decisions about farm or forest land. They are interested in setting and implementing ambitious conservation goals. They want to learn with other landowners. And they recognize the power that they hold as landowners to lead this shift to practices that are improving soil health, reducing soil erosion, cleaning and protecting waters, increasing biodiversity, and recognize that all of these things help farms and communities thrive. So, like a number of other peer organizations, we're a peer-to-peer network. And Climate Land Leaders tell us that this element of peer learning and support and encouragement is a primary value that they gain from participating. All of you here who work in and near conservation know that this work of changing farming practices, diversifying farming operations, implementing new conservation on land, this is multi-year and often multi-generation work. But members can fast track to knowledge and experience and information by tapping into the collective experience of this group. We base this network on social and behavior change research. We're really aiming to amplify the power of peer learning, making progress in community. And we know that when a person makes a commitment publicly, they're more likely to follow through. And we also recognize that we need each other for continued inspiration and encouragement. Also spaces to share grief about climate crisis. You know, the magnitude of climate change and its effects, the grief that people feel about increasing climate-related disasters, about biodiversity loss, the fear people feel about the world our children and grandchildren are inheriting. All of this can be, as Teresa Opheim, who founded this organization, says, this can be a real bummer. So it's important to offer positive action. And in our case, tangible, on the ground action that points our agriculture and our land use in the right direction. And this network is really an avenue for that. These folks tend to be super networked and involved in lots of different complementary organizations. Ruth Rabinowitz, who's here tonight, who you'll hear from, is no exception. So they're active in other agricultural, environmental, and climate action groups. Often their networks extend to their faith communities and political activism. And this is such a tremendous benefit, sort of both ways. Ruth and I were talking about this, and she remarked, it's a form of biodiversity. And it's really true. It's so important to have this cross-pollination of ideas and diversity of perspectives flowing in and out, so people bring what they learn in climate land leaders to other groups and vice versa. I'm gonna highlight a couple of other aspects of the network. So one is policy engagement. We've got a lot of climate land leaders who are active in policy in their local communities and at state and federal levels. We've got members who are serving on state FSA committees, soil and water conservation district commissioners. And throughout the year, and especially in this Farm Bill year, members are submitting testimony and contacting legislators to educate them about the role of agriculture in climate change and conservation in addressing climate change, and to advocate for more public investment that supports farmers and landowners implementing conservation, doing ecological restoration, and regenerative practices that decrease greenhouse gas emissions, increase carbon storage, and provide other ecosystem services like cleaning air and water. We think and talk a lot about how these are changes that affect livelihoods. And while we know that shifting to more diverse farming operations and climate-friendly practices is what's required for the long-term viability of our farm and food system, these shifts involve new skills and operational changes, and they might involve different equipment, different risks. And so our climate and agriculture policies need to provide tools and incentives for farmers to make these shifts. The second aspect I'll highlight is a focus on equity as these landowners consider how they came to be landowners and the long-term plan for their land. And this means a lot of family conversations, a lot of personal reflection, particularly for white landowners. So that's the majority of this network. That mirrors private US land ownership, where 96% of US land is owned by white folks. And so this equity focused subgroup spends time diving into the US history of land theft from the Native Americans who were here, the history of Black land ownership in the US, which was at around 14% in the early 1900s and now is just over 1%. And there's a long history of discrimination in the USDA and dispossession of land due to racism and violence. And we've got this really interesting moment that we're in with 400 million acres of farmland changing hands within this decade as a generation of farmers retire, all while things like long-term tenure on land and access to capital are two of the biggest hurdles facing our next generation of farmers. And so while we are advocating for policy that addresses these historical and current inequities, we also believe individual landowners have a role to play. So what does this look like? This looks like climate land leaders who are prioritizing renting and selling land to beginning farmers. This looks like climate land leaders who have sold land and are devoting those proceeds, those resources, to farmers of color seeking to purchase land. We've been exploring different commons models of land ownership, conservation easements as a vehicle to increase affordability of land for beginning farmers. I think I saw somebody here from SILT, Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. We spent some time with them. So these two climate land leaders pictured here, Paula Westmoreland on the left and Sally McCoy on the right, lead our equity focused cohort. And Paula puts it this way: so much land is changing hands. Where that land goes, who gets it, who benefits, those are really big questions. And the Climate Land Leaders Initiative helps landowners address those questions and act on their values. Oh dear. Hang on. Well, it's telling me part of my slide didn't load, so you don't get to see the other pictures of perennials, but you do get to see a picture of, that's Kernza, a perennial grain. So remember what I shared publicly about committing to goals. Here's one of our big ones for the next 2 years, that collectively climate land leaders will transform 7,500 acres of cropland to permanent cover, to perennials. We know that trees and shrubs and permanent grass plantings are top natural climate solutions that increase carbon storage. And they're also good for water and air quality and biodiversity. So we're offering a per acre stipend this year to climate land leaders who are converting cropland to perennials or maintaining established perennial planting. We want to, it's really important to also reward early adopters. They often get missed in policy changes. And as one of our members said, it's a good bite out of the elephant. We're trying to take a bite out of the elephant. All right, so how does this all come together for a climate land leader? I mentioned one of the main things the cohort does each year is set goals for conservation and changes on their land. This progress wheel is a tool we use with the group to help them set goals and assess progress, and to really keep a holistic view that includes both the science of addressing climate change through land, as well as all of the relationships that are integral to doing this work in community. Ruth is going to talk you through her progress wheel in more detail. So I'm actually going to close with just a couple years snapshot of Ruth's goals. I don't expect you to read all of these, but just kind of take it in, and you might notice Ruth starting to work with brand new farming tenants. She's working with various federal conservation programs and projects. She's doing a lot of maintenance. She's walking the land. And now imagine this times 80 landowners, and imagine it times 200 landowners. This is a lot of action and progress, and there's so much knowledge and experience and wisdom in this group. So much active learning and sharing, which is really important right now, especially as our scientific understanding of these ecosystem services that these conservation practices on land are providing is increasing, and that's a really powerful thing. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ruth to give you an on-the-ground perspective. And Ruth, just tell me when you want me to advance slides. I'll start you here.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be here. I feel tired looking at those goals, but it's great. So this picture is of me taken on my farm, just down the road where I'm living. And I am in Madison County, Iowa. I spend about half the year here in Iowa, the growing season. And then I go back to California for the winter. So I'm in the CRP, a tall CRP buffer. Previously, that corn would have gone right up to the trees. And so this was one of my first accomplishments, maybe, 10 years ago, when my father was alive, is I got information from the DNR biologist to back off the tree line and give the tree roots some area to not have corn and also to give the wildlife and pollinators some habitat and some nesting areas. So that this picture kind of sums it up right there. So there's, trees, there's actually water right behind those trees, creek, and then very tall conventional ag corn on the right of the screen. So next slide. Okay, so my father, David Rabinowitz, was a child of the Great Depression, and he put himself through college to become a doctor, and he saved his money, and he always wanted to be a farmer. And so he researched things and just found out that Iowa had some of the most productive, beautiful soil in the world, if not the nation. And he started purchasing some farms really as kind of an investment, and for his two daughters, there's no sons, back in 1978. And he would fly out to Iowa with us. I would go with him almost every year, and we always came to the Iowa State Fair. And so that was always August or something, and you can't even see your farm then, right? It's like a blanket of crop. So there we are, he's got the corn, and he says he can sleep well at night, and it was just tall, we couldn't see erosion or anything. He passed away in 2017, and I was executor, and I inherited 6 farms. I did sell one farm so I could build my home in Madison County, which was my dream for a decade, to actually have a farmhouse on the farm that I own, and actually, wake up with the sun and the sound of the birds of what's going on in the actual land. And then I'm on the right in front of some conventional crop ground there. So I am the next generation. And he would always say to me and my sister, just don't sell the farms, just don't sell the farms, whatever you do, or sell the worst farm. I sold my worst farm. So next slide. Okay, so I used to manage 12 farms, and now I have 5. So even though this looks like a lot, it's much more simple than it used to be, although it's still complicated. So every farm is unique. They're all really different. There's different soils, there's different topography, there's different NRCS offices. And working with climate land leaders is really helpful because we're scattered about. I now have someone I can go stay with in Mitchell County, for instance, and connect with the soil and water conservationists. That's part of climate land leaders. So the network is really, really strong, and it's really, really helpful. So we'll start at the top here. So Roberts County, South Dakota, the outlying farm. I'm working extensively with NRCS and a new tenant we're doing actually a 5 crop rotation that includes spring wheat, and this year's sunflowers. I can't wait to take pictures of the sunflowers, the black oiled sunflowers. We're going to do some rotational grazing actually flash mob grazing of some cattle with electric fence. I got a funded for a solar cattle watering station up there. And we're also doing diversified cover crop up there as well. So that's a really complicated enrollment. I can share that with other climate land leaders, and then they know about these things. And then so in Mitchell County, haven't started doing no-till there yet, which I really would like eventually. I'm doing strip till. I'm doing cover crops there. This is my most simple farm there. Where I'm living in Madison County, I'm implementing a permaculture design. I have a permaculture design certificate, and you can check out Oxbow Farms, Iowa on Facebook and Instagram. I'm blogging there constantly about what's going on here, but we've planted like 300 trees. The prairie is going to explode with yellow color very shortly here, and the pollinators are already flying around, and the birds are coming back, and we have quail here and pheasant. And then, I've got larger after farms in like Clark County, and I do have some hunting leases. And so I can help other climate and land leaders understand why you'd want a hunting lease on some properties or not. And I just experienced no-till rye cover crop up to my chest with corn planted in it. That was scary, but you know, it's sprayed now and it's going to start growing with this recent rain. And I mean, the sharing is just remarkable when you have a retreat like we just had this last weekend, and you can just sit and talk at length with other farmland owners and share what your challenges are, what your victories are, and they can do the same thing. Union County was kind of like forgotten about farm until recently. I mean, not forgotten, but I just hadn't really done a lot of improvements down there. I just did a huge waterway project down there. It was just eroding terribly. I've got a 5-acre pond, so it's going to really clean up that water. There's some beaver down there, and a lot of people say, you know, kill the beaver, but I never do things anymore like quickly anymore. And so I always research and find things out, and find out that beavers are actually really great and for a lot of reasons. And yeah, there's just every one of these farms is so different. And so I need a lot of help with these various organizations that I belong to. And when I lived in California, I felt very isolated as a female landowner in a very male-dominated industry such as agriculture. And I've come to find out that women own or co-own half the land in Iowa, half the farmland in Iowa. It's not really known. So, you know, women we want to conserve for the next generation, for our children, for our nieces and nephews. We get it that we have to take care of these properties that have been entrusted to us, especially during a climate crisis that we are currently having. Next slide. Okay, so progress wheel, it's sort of like your report card. So the legacy part, I'm a little bit low there because I have a trust, but, and everything's delineated, but I want to make sure that the 300 trees I just planted or the prairie I just planted is not going to be sold and torn up and planted back to corn and soybeans. And so I need some work to make sure that, you know, is that an easement? What exactly is that? Do I have to have a lot of written instructions? So this is really helpful. My land relationship has really been zooming up on the pink left side there because I'm living here now. I mean, I could not wait to finally get to Iowa where I could wake up and be on the land and drive to my farms easily. And, you know, now I'm foraging for, you know, the golden oyster mushrooms and morels, if you're really lucky. And the mulberries are coming in, and the gooseberries are going to be happening soon. We're dehydrating the mushrooms. I eat them, you know, in omelets. I'll make them in sauces. So the forest you don't have to plant anything that's already there. So now I'm getting to the fruits of the labor, right? All these years of scanning and texting and paperwork and all this stuff. And now the land relationship where it's just, I'm hearing the animals and the birds, and it's really coming alive for me. And I can really get a pulse of what's happening because I'm here. And the biodiversity on the right side is definitely coming back. I am currently living on what was conventional, you know, corn, soybeans. And now when I take a spade, there's just huge earthworms, and it is just like the land is just singing now because there's just so much diversity happening with the grasses and forbs and all these trees and what they're producing. So this was a really good learning tool. Okay, next slide. So I actually was brave and I changed a bunch of tenants last year. So that means I had to terminate my old tenants, which was not easy. There's a lot of pressure. but I decided that I really wanted my baseline to be no-till and mandatory cover crops on every acre. And my current tenants would not necessarily buy in on that. There were a lot of, what ifs and probably, maybe, I'm not sure, can't, it's too expensive, whatever. So I did get some grants, and then I do have some tenants growing their own rye seed. This is my first oats cover crop right on the field next to me. It was pretty fortuitous. I had never seen a fly on of cover crops in my life. And I happened to be doing dishes at my kitchen window when I heard an airplane, and I ran outside, and like a bride getting showered with rice, I was out there getting cover crop on me. It was pretty awesome. Took a video of the whole thing, and they were done with that 30-acre field in a matter of, 10 or 15 minutes. And we had some timely rains, and we got some good oats cover crop. And I had never seen this farm have a cover crop in my whole life. And it probably hadn't ever since my dad bought the farm. So that was a big moment to just go out there and pull on it and go, you got some roots, and there's something going on after the crop was harvested. Next slide. And then there's a lot of, talk about the bioreactors these days. This is the pond that I live right across from. It's a 5-acre beautiful pond. And I realized, my goodness, there's like huge snapping turtles and fish and trumpeter swans and Canadian geese and heron. And we just saw a bald eagle dive in there and get a fish. And I'm going, this is still conventional crop ground right next to it. Maybe we should get some bioreactors to really clean up this water before it hits this pond, and not just think, well, the pond's going to clean it up. Well, there's all kinds of species living in there. And I'm upstream, right? So we're talking about the rivers and the creeks. This has to, when that flows out, it's got to go somewhere. So I'm going to do my part and get those wood chip bioreactors on the 3 tile outlets that are going into this pond. And I do know that that's been funded. I have not signed for it or seen the design yet, but that's coming. And that's a collaboration of EQIP with NRCS and the IDLES, Iowa Department of Land Stewardship, on that one. Next slide. Okay, and then I do have a 7-acre oxbow lake, which was why I named my farm. And this is part of it. So this is in Clark County, and this has been, probably 2 to 3 years in the making. It's funded. It's that collaboration with the NRCS, EQIP, and IDLES. So all we need to do is take out 3 30-foot sections of trees. And my next phase of this is like, who's getting those trees and what's happening with those trees, because a lot of them are black walnut. So that's my next thing I'm doing right now. And then that gives an area for the dozer to come in and just scoop out about 2 feet and kind of clear out some of this area so that we can deepen the creek so that it can hold more water. And as we scoop out that soil, it's black gold, right? It's called the spoils, and that will go up onto the crop ground where it came from and kind of band-aid some of the eroded hillsides right there. So it's not going to be wasted. It's going to all be used. And then we're making little berms, almost like what a beaver would dam up, just 3 sections, not very much, to hold that water. So it's basically a wetland ecosystem. It's an environmental priority. And I don't know what I would do if I was just out in California. It'd be really hard to just oversee these projects. These are very complicated projects that I really want to personally be there as much as I can to oversee. Okay, next slide. All right, so Pheasants Forever helped me with the design with my permaculture idea of I would like to add all kinds of Iowa native trees and shrubs around where I'm living. So this is a small orchard of fruit trees. This is all the DNR shrubs that are about they're about $1 each. You get like 25 for $1 from the state forestry. So it's Rhodosier dogwood, gray dogwood, American plum, serviceberry, 9-bark. The forest pansy is also red bud. I've got, and then I also have all kinds of oak trees. I have red oak, swamp white oak, silver maple, some of the windbreak trees of the Norway spruce, the eastern white pine, the concolor fir, to name a few. So those are all been hand mulched, hand weeded, no sprays at all, protected with T-posts, chicken wire, hog wire, etc. around, because we have a lot of deer pressure, and hand watered for about 2 to 3 years now. Some of them are 3 years old, some of them are 2 years old. And it's getting really fun now because they're getting large and they're starting to produce their first fruits and their first flowers. And I know that it's not just for me, it's for who comes after me. It's for the next generation, because some of these trees can live 100+ years. And that's really exciting, because I know that there were a lot more trees in Iowa that were dozed. And so it's nice to put some things back, sequester that carbon, and that becomes a climate solution. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to try not to get long here because I know we want to leave time for questions and answers. These are just some pictures of the cattle watering station, the solar watering station that was put up. So it's actually, I'm right next to a lake in South Dakota. So we're actually pumping out of that lake, just like, once a year when we have this flash mob grazing of cattle, and we're using the sun to do that pumping. And they do have grants for that at NRCS. Next. And a dream of mine was working with Julie McGuire. She was the vice president of the Iowa Farmers Union for a while. And she's like a teacher of beekeeping. And she placed these 4 hives right in my prairie about, I don't know, a month and a half ago. And we're going to get a little bit of honey. And she comes like every week and puts on her white, outfit and works with the bees. And it's just so fun to have some collaboration with other farmers at this level. Next. So, okay, so in the upper left, that's Lee Tesdell and Jane Shea, and we're all climate land leaders. And when I first got my house built, it's a manufactured home, I was pretty freaked out. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm like out here on 40 acres. This is crazy. I'm on a dirt road. So I asked them both at different times to come down and visit me. And I wanted to show them around. I said, and by the way, can you bring your chainsaw? And they did. And so each of them put in like an hour or 2 of a little bit of chainsaw work, because I couldn't even walk in the trees. They were so dense. I wanted to even see what was happening in there. So we had a joke around like, well, we both brought our chainsaws, sort of like a welcome to Iowa party. And we have these wonderful retreats together. In the bottom left, we all stayed at some like Airbnbs for the Practical Farmers of Iowa conference. And so this was in, I believe it was January of 2023, when there was snow out there, and we would have dinners together, and like we go to the conference and then we talk about what we learned. And it's like a family or a tribe or something. It just feels really good to just not be kind of on your own in this very complicated world of climate change and agriculture, where things can feel very overwhelming very quickly. Okay, next slide. And then this is a fun slide because I went through this when I was building my house. So this is called the emotional journey of creating anything great. This is the best idea ever. This will be fun. This is harder than I thought. This is going to be a lot of work. This sucks, and I have no idea what I'm doing. The dark swamp of despair. Okay, so then we have persistence there. Okay, but it still sucks. Quick, let's call it a day and say we learned something. Hey, wow. This is one of the things I am most proud of. And I feel like that's the prairie and that's these trees right now. That is one of the things I am the most proud of, that I took corn and soybeans and I turned it into this paradise for humans and birds, butterflies, worms, mycorrhizae, the whole thing. So it's not rocket science. And that's why I post so much on Oxbows. I want people to know how to do it and maybe follow it. And this is the support of the organizations I'm a part of, like Climate Land Leaders. Okay, next. And we celebrate our progress, yeah, I'm elated. It's so fun to forage your own mushrooms and eat them and be proud of, you've got cover crops, it's not bare land. Don't farm naked, it's like something's growing. There's a root out there. This was prairie. This was all prairie with bison. And how do we even remotely get back to any sense of that? And cover crops is like foundational, of course. So, and I love my CRP everywhere. I've got a couple 100 acres of CRP, and boy, the animals are really, really using it. There's bedding areas all over the place. And I know that the quail, the bobwhite quail, have come back in Union County because of that CRP. So I think, is that the last slide? Okay, and then so the next horizons are, I have a couple of farms. One is like 40 minutes from Des Moines in New Virginia. And it's a little less than an acre with 3 empty grain bins that could be used for some kind of storage of tools. I can trench in water, and I'm going to advertise that as for a beginning farmer. It hasn't been sprayed. It can already kind of go organic. And then as I have some CRP expiring in about 2 years here in Madison County, instead of just, going right back into CRP, I can trench in water on that one. We're 20 minutes from Des Moines, gives them an opportunity to grow food, right? There's so much happening with the 500,000 population in Des Moines. Can't a restaurant use tomatoes grown locally, etc.? So I really want to provide some opportunities for some small scale farmers that's pretty low rent, accessible for Des Moines. And so I'll be advertising those opportunities coming up. And I think that's what we've got.
So Ruth, this is just wonderful to hear and see what you are doing and to see it in slides as well as see it in person. We've got several questions and I'm not quite sure where to start, but as I'm going to back up through the chat, and the first one was a comment from Mary Ellen that our, actually yours also, our representative in the US House, Zach Nunn, has been working on some legislation for farming, and that's a good thing. I don't think we're going to go out into the politics so much because there are so many questions for you and for Sarah about how things worked for you. And if you give me just 1 second. Oh, I'll get back to Steve Paulsrud had a good question there at the beginning about the incentives, and you talked about them slightly, but he's asking about creating more buffers between crops and waterways besides the original buffers and the riparian buffers. Are you doing prairie strips or any of those kinds of things? And do you find those worthwhile?
Yeah, I have at least one large prairie strip that was like kind of a gulling area between CRP and the crop ground. It was this low point. So we just put like a 120-foot strip of prairie right there, which kind of has been healing up that area that was eroding, kind of in lieu of a waterway of just getting some perennial vegetation out there. So I have duck habitat, I have pheasant habitat, I've got quail buffers, I have CRP waterways, I have whole sections of CRP. Yeah, I mean, anywhere there's water, I definitely have 20 to 30 feet of CRP.
Great.
And prior to that, the machinery was going right up to the edge. And I knew even 10, 12 years ago, that was wrong. Like it never computed. I knew it was wrong. I could almost see chunks of like, dirt, soil going, like falling in. And, the John Deeres are very heavy machinery to have right next to water. So yeah, those are all good things. And I have a new wetland enrollment, about 4 acres in size in Clark County that's going in this fall. It's notated as wetland, forgetting what it's called exactly. It's got the wetland attributes of the soil, and it does hold a lot of water. And so we're going to actually dedicate that as a wetland CRP. So that's going in.
Thanks for that one. This one is always a question, and kind of a squeamish question. I've been through it myself. But what were the reasons your old tenants gave for not wanting to go to no-till and cover crops?
Well, first of all, they were saying they were doing no-till, which I believe them. But when I had NRCS, Rodale Institute, and Silt take a look at the fields, they said this is tillage. Okay, so there was that part of it. Or I would hear, oh, we just tickle the bottoms, they're just tight, or something like that. The bottom ground right by by the creeks. I don't want any tickling of that stuff. So thank you. So yeah, it was just
a variety of reasons.
A variety of reasons, and a lot of cost prohibitiveness, and a lot of, I don't know if we're going to have time kind of stuff.
Okay. Then Christine asks about if you have bioreactors, and if so, why?
Well, I'm going to be getting that bioreactor here.
Yeah, because I just was curious about why you would need to go with the bioreactor, because I kind of, and I'm naive. I admit I'm not a farmer. I'm just I was a farmer in Grenada, but not in our big industrial landscape of Iowa. But I always think of bioreactors as band-aids to the real problem of not having, like really good conservation on the ground. Are you putting in a bioreactor to like clean up other cropland that's flowing into your waterways?
Well, I don't think that they would fund it if they didn't think it was eligible. So someone thinks it's eligible at the NRCS, but I have 3 grass waterways, and they have tile in them, and the tile dumps into this beautiful pond full of animals, right? Full of, turtles and fish. And so we're trying to clean up the water from these tiles before it hits that pond.
And it's not your tiles though.
It is my tile. Yeah.
Oh, well, don't you, with all the conservation you're doing, don't you think your tiles will eventually, your water's going to be cleaned up and you won't have the bad
I
runoff?
sure hope so. Yeah. I mean, but I guess that's a complicated question. I inquired about it to protect the pond. And the pond goes into the Steel Branch Creek, which I think goes into Clanton Creek, which goes, it's the watershed. So let's get it as clean as possible. So maybe it is a Band-Aid, but I'm all for like, how can I be the best steward possible? And if there is technology and abilities out there to clean up that water,
Mhm.
Ideally, I'd like to go organic. I mean, in more than one of my fields, but these things take a little bit of time. So I'm working on that.
Okay, cool. I was curious. I'm gonna follow up with you because I keep in touch with you, and I'm
Oh yeah.
curious, maybe that might be a tour for me to come down and learn a little bit
Here.
more about it.
Thanks, Christine. I think that from what I know of Ruth and from what we've seen tonight, she is very willing to share. And I think that maybe we'll get to see some of her stats and so forth from those bioreactors and other things. Caroline, I'm going to leave your question about the book towards the end because I want to know more about it if they don't know anything about it. So let's finish up with the rest of these. There's a couple about bees, and Lisa Mitchell had to go early, so she left a comment about European honeybees competing with native bees to the detriment of native bees. And then Anthony asks, what are you doing and what are climate land leaders doing to promote the bumblebee populations, which I understand have been being degraded, and maybe because of the niconoids. But can you talk to us just a couple of sentences about bees, and maybe we can add that to the list of other things that we're going to ask you about in more detail the next time we see you?
Oh boy, I am not a bee expert at all, but I mean, I love the Xerces Society and I've been on a lot of their Zooms. There seems like there's a lot of food out here for these bees and everybody else. I mean, there's going to be thousands and thousands of flowers, and and I let the dandelions go. That's the only thing they were on. I mean, there was just yellow everywhere. So I don't know about this competition thing with the native bees and the honeybees. I would have to look into that more. That's not my area of expertise.
Okay, so Xerces is a great group to follow up on with bee things. And I hear you saying that you're already involved in that. I really like Sarah Hunt's comment. As Ruth is dramatic, she is excited and she is really into this. And a tour of her farm is well worth the trip to Madison County. Carolyn asked the question that I also asked. Changing tenants is hard enough. Finding new ones is hard too. How did you find your new farmers?
That is, the $100,000 question. So I was on, like, during COVID, PFI, Practical Farmers of Iowa, had their conference online. Okay. It was amazing. It was called Coming Home or something. And so I was on my couch in California, and there comes Michael Downey from Next Gen Ag, and he's talking about flex leases and working with beginning farmers. And I literally emailed him minutes after his presentation. Okay. And so when the next time I was in Iowa, we started corresponding. I said, here's what's going on, and made the decision after I really tried to work it out with my guys, because that's who they are. They're men that are farming in my situation, and it wasn't working out. And so he, with his network, I don't know how he advertised it, but it was these farms were advertised, and it was, you've got to be no-till and you got to be into cover crops. And I do a lower rent because I do a flex lease. So it's less stressful for everybody to not have to go to their banker and get lots of money for the rent. So my rent's cheaper because I want this conservation. And so I actually went and interviewed these farmers at their farms, and we drove around the countryside and showed up and, do we have chemistry? Do we not have chemistry? And I successfully got, let's see, I think it was 4 new farmers in Iowa and then a new farmer in South Dakota. So no, it's not easy, but he had his little black book and was able to, he sent me resumes. My goodness, I had resumes from farmers. These farmers before that sort of like came, here's the deed, Ruth, and here's the farmer that goes with the deed. You know, like it was like all sandwiched together. Like, here you go. This is who's running your farm. And I went, I've never gotten a job like that in my life. You know, how does that work? So I wanted to see a resume, you know, where did you go to school? And, you know, what's your deal and stuff. And so it was a job interview.
That's the first time I've ever thought about it that way in a job interview. So, okay, wonderful. We're going to talk more about that one next time too. And Stephen asks the $1 million or the economic question about farming. Are you breaking even, or is it more than that, or does it matter right now?
Oh, I'm not just breaking even. I am taking the money and I am just actually plowing it right back into the farms. The waterway I just did was one of the biggest, most expensive things I've done. I've just wrote the checks today and the other day. And so it's basically, I live a pretty simple-ish life. And I try to keep, you know, the older car and all those different things. And I'm way into just investing in the farms, actually. So, I don't like a lot of debt. I don't like a lot of stress. And I'm just trying to just keep these farms, give them the TLC love. They're basically, it's like a show of fixer-upper farms. Okay. They were coming in really rough, all fixer-uppers. They all had problems. And I had to figure this out, you know, and it was like, what's the worst offender? Okay, I'm going to attack that this year. What's the next worst offender? That's next year. And we're working down the list. I hope that answers that.
I think that's a great answer. I like that. I do know that one time I was like, oh, when I realized that the farmer sitting next to me, my farmer sitting next to me, had a totally different aspect. I'm very much, if it breaks even, I'm okay, because I too had ideas that I wanted to do this and I wanted to do that. And if the program paid for part of it and I paid for part of it, if the crop came in break even, I'm okay. But the farmer sitting next to me was talking yield, was talking price per bushel, was talking bushels. And it's like, who is this guy? And don't I need somebody who's maybe a little bit more on my same wavelength? And turned out he thought so, and so did I. So, but it's, you know, it's the year that you can do it and the time that you can do it. And if you can, then you can. So we have some really nice comments about how great this program is and so forth. Are there any? We're running at 8:07 already, and I want to go back to that question about Caroline's book. Caroline, can you just read that book? I'm not running onto it real quick. Can you tell us that book again and ask your question?
Yes, the book is called All We Can Save, and it's an yes, I was going to ask Sarah and Ruth if they knew about it. I was stream sampling with a bunch of volunteers last week, and one of the young women who came is a Conservation Minnesota volunteer, and she wants to put together a learning circle around that book. And so I thought that I would ask your opinions. It's an anthology by of essays and poetry and artwork by women who are involved in climate activism. That's how she explained it to me, and that's how I've read about it. And it sounded so wonderful, and I love the idea of a learning circle. And I was going to ask if either of you know about it, and do you lend some support to that idea? And if so, I can tell you who to contact if you want to be part of a learning circle. But Sarah or Ruth, would you like to comment about it?
It's a wonderful collection. I haven't read all of it, but it's very dip-inable, which is really lovely. Essays, poems, art, women from all over the world writing about, with a lot of hope and creativity, and I think collective, collective energy for the work that we have ahead of us, and also that it can be joyful work to do together. So I highly recommend it. I think you should say yes to that learning circle, Caroline, and yeah, please do forward the info. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's a very we need this kind of energy and inspiration in this work, and it's definitely a source of that.
Well, I definitely fall into the cynic, I'm generally disgusted with humanity category. And so when Eve told me about this opportunity, I thought it might be a good way to sort of slap me around a little bit and see the better side of how things are going in my less better side days. How about this? Christine, do you want to tell everybody about the recording, and then what we'll do is we'll add Eve Kramer's link into it, and then you all can follow up individually with this young woman who's putting together this learning circle around the book.
Sure,
Sounds like
absolutely.
a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have this recording uploaded to YouTube, and then I send out an email for all the people who registered with any relevant links. So thank you.
I'm through with, let's see, we just had a comment from Steve. I really like that comment too. Steve, why don't you read that one? I like it. Okay, I'll read.
Yeah, you go ahead. I can't see the chat right now, but yeah.
Okay. Steve says, it's nice to hear about your economic, Ruth, and that there's too much greed and the nitrates from the upper Mississippi creating dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, and also the city of Des Moines and yes, the Des Moines Waterworks having trouble getting their nitrates out of the Raccoon River, which is a mile from my house, and that they're talking about getting their water from other sources. The Des Moines River, basically, and maybe even thinking about wells, and the Des Moines River, unfortunately, is fed in large part by the raccoon. So anyway.
I just appreciate this. This is the first time I've been here, and it's been wonderful. And I really want to get more involved with the particular problem, and buffers are the way to do it. And we have to incentivize those big farms to do that. Otherwise, it's profit over beauty.
Yes. Steve, where are you from, and how did you hear about our program?
Muscatine, Iowa. I just joined the League of Women Voters, and so they've kind of tasked me with water. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
So you're on the what is it called? The Upper Mississippi League of Women Voters group?
I also, have been to a couple of their meetings by Zoom also. So, yep.
That's fantastic.
Great that you found us. Thank you.
Yeah, Mary Ellen Miller is on this too, and she's an active.
One of the board members, isn't she?
Mm-hmm.
I'm chatting with Steve right now.
Okay.
There you go. I knew you were there, Mary Ellen. So
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Christine,
Yes.
so I'm in the Minneapolis area, so I was just curious, a question for Sarah. Are you doing anything much with urban areas where you are as part of your land? Whatever, saving?
Yeah, we have, I would say in terms of the members in the cohort currently, it's folks with rural farm and forest land. Although I think, the closer someone lives to a metro, the more they're aware of, or in some cases involved in urban agriculture. We do have one member who actually kind of straddles, she's actually, she founded the Somali American Farmers Association here in Minneapolis, which has done a lot of growing in Minneapolis with folks from that community. And she also has a market farm in rural Minnesota. So a few folks who straddle both worlds, and then depending on where somebody lives and where their land is, they might be more or less involved. But generally speaking, it's work that we're totally supportive of and try to stay aware of, and it's less of our lane.
I know this is farmer oriented, and it's great to see Teresa's face. That's one of the people that participated. I learned so much when she was at SFA. But I'm part of a watershed district, and we've got probably 40% of our watershed district is lawns. So we're trying to look at how we can incorporate more ecosystems, turn more functionality back into that area, because we are contributing to the Gulf big time. So yeah, so I was just curious with what you were doing in your area.
Thank you so much for your question.
Yeah.
That was very helpful.
Jill's
Sarah,
actually.
Sarah says we need more Ruths, and we need more of all of us, is my opinion. And so if you see yourself in this cohort or know a landowner, and she's put climate land leaders information here in the chat, like Christine said, this chat will come to you also, so you can see who participated in the chat, and you'll have, I don't know that you'll have emails, will we, Christine?
No, I don't share that. But we do.
But we
many
can contact Christine and
Yeah.
do the please send me more information or introduce me to so-and-so.
Sure.
And I highly recommend that you do that. The more that we do this thinking like a watershed and connect, the better off we all will be. And it's not where you live, it's how well you connect in. Because on Zoom, we can be in the same room at the same time. I love it. I'm going to turn the questions and answers back to you, Christine and Caroline, to do the wrap up, because somebody may still say, oh, I have something, but I'm going to let you decide on all of that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you again, Chris,
Thank you,
for
Chris.
all your time and effort. And
no problem. I love these.
Yeah, you're a great asset, and one of my heroes since I moved back. I just wanted to thank Jill Crafton too. She is a Minnesota from the Minnesota division who is involved with the UMRI, where we're housed under the Minnesota division for our Izaak Walton Leagues. And our director, David Zentner, always joins us, and he's here. So shout out to Z, as we call him. And also we have Rep Chuck Eisenhart, who joined us a little later, and he's a fantastic advocate for our environment and really clean water and healthy soils and so forth. So shout out for Rep Eisenhart for popping on too. Thank you for taking time to join us. He's been a great supporter for all these great initiatives in our state. And again, thank you both, Ruth and Sarah, and everybody else for coming on. And my colleague Caroline, who we're already missing big time, and We'll be in touch with everybody. Again, if you have some links that you'd like me to share with the video and anything else that you'd like other people to share or know about, please send them to me and I'll include them in when I send out the video link. That should be done hopefully tomorrow or by the next day. I usually get it done within 48 hours. And then it's posted, it's shared with a YouTube link that can be shared out. So.
And Mary Ellen reminds us what's next. And we take a summer hiatus. And so watch for us again in the fall, right, Christine? And, and we all, and I know everybody else on this as well, are involved in several different groups each, and they all have programming throughout the summer, throughout the year. So whether it's Climate Land Leaders, the Raccoon River Watershed, the Panora Ikes, the UMRI, which sponsors this or is involved in this, that Christine and Caroline have been doing. Tell us where you're from and connect us into yours and vice versa. It helps us.
Right. And we have some other activities going on. We have a endowment grant with the Panora Conservation Chapter, which Chris and I are both involved with. We'll be doing some outreach activities throughout the summer with water, quality testing on with the Safe Squirrel Hollow program.
And then there's the Nature Summit coming November 16th to 19th. Is that right?
16th and 17th at Drake University. It's going to be a huge Iowa event.
And so watch your emails, you'll hear about it. It's every organization and entity that we can think of connected into the Drake presentation in a 2-day seminar. And professor and retired director of the Ag Law Studies, Neil Hamilton, is putting it together. So that'll be a fantastic thing for anybody who's interested in conservation in any way, shape, or form.
Yep. And I have a big art project that's going to be debuted there. So it's all about clean water
and the rivers.
And the rivers with champion farmers. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we'll sign off. And again, just feel free to email if you have any additional links you'd like to share with this event.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a beautiful week.
Okay.
See you, Ruth.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So much. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Sarah. It was great meeting you.
Thanks again, Chris.